Hey guys, tonight we journey to a time when the stars above the desert weren't just for admiring, they were used to map the cosmos. You find yourself in 14th century West Africa, trekking beneath a velvet black sky littered with starlight so sharp it almost hums. You've heard the rumors? A city where books are worth more than gold, where people argue about the stars in public? This isn't your average stroll through history. The Sahara is brutal. Probably wouldn't survive this trip without your Tuareg guide, who, by the way, just identified 3 constellations while adjusting the strap on his sandal. 8 show off, and where a wrong opinion about the shape of the earth might win you either applause, or a long silence and a stern look over someone's teacup. The sand beneath your feet is cool now after a scorching day, and the only sounds are the steady plod of camels and the creak of leather saddles. The mosque looms like a sandcastle designed by someone who really likes math. Its walls are studded with wood beams that serve both as supports and as impromptu climbing ladders when repairs are needed. You don't know it yet, but inside, beneath those dry shadows and thick walls, scholars are debating the very shape of the earth, and not as a punchline or a posturing contest, but as something that could shift how caravans travel, how trade moves, and how faith aligns with observation. A camel driver you meet swears that the earth must be flat because water stays in a bowl. But later, over a bowl of deg, a thick millet porridge, a young scholar insists that the shadow of the moon during an eclipse proves otherwise. They hum with the weight of ideas older than maps. The author describes the earth as a spinning pearl upon the black cloth of heaven. You rest under a canopy while a nearby teacher rattles off distances between stars and speculates about where exactly heaven begins. The students nod, one of them drawing circles in the sand with a stick. And you have to admit that's kind of beautiful, even if you're pretty sure pearls don't spin. You nod politely through both. And not one of them ended with anyone getting exiled, canceled, or roasted on social media. Just a few raised eyebrows, a thoughtful sip of tea, and the rustle of another scroll being unfurled. You blink, he shrugs. But it's a very serious turtle. Can't argue with that. You're part of a slow-moving caravan inching toward Timbuktu, a city whose very name will one day become shorthand for the middle of nowhere. Some claim scholars leaned heavily on Islamic astronomy inherited from Andalusia and Baghdad, where Ptolemaic models circulated in Arabic. But that's not stopping them. They're trying. They're thinking. They're blending science and myth, faith and reason, the visible and the guessed. And unlike a lot of people in future centuries, they are redoing it with remarkable patience and a surprising amount of shade thrown over minor errors in math. Others argue that cosmological ideas in this region were a blend shaped by oral traditions, North African translations, and local interpretations. But right now, it's the center of everything. His voice is clear, almost melodic, echoing off the plaster. You feel a strange calm settle in your bones. Maybe it's the rhythm of the words, or maybe it's the way everyone here seems to be living in a library. It's titled something like The Movement of Celestial Spheres According to the Older Ones. The seller assures you it came from a scholar who studied in Fez, Cairo, maybe even Mecca. The seller also says it is full of ideas so true they damn to even need testing, which is either deeply comforting or deeply suspicious. The city smells of dust, spices, and something lightly smoked, probably millet pancakes. The streets are already stirring. Early risers carrying baskets. Donkeys braying at each other like they've got unresolved business, and traders laying out beads and amulets under fabric awnings. You pass a stall where someone is arguing heatedly about whether Venus can be seen in both the morning and evening. It's not a metaphor. That's literally what they're arguing about. Welcome to the intellectual capital of the Sahel. Timbuktu is no sleepy outpost. Not tonight. It glows in the distance, a constellation of lanterns flickering like a desert mirage come true. But first, survival. The wind kicks up again, blowing grit into your robe and stinging your eyes. You clutch your headscarf a little tighter. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where in the world are you listening from right now, and what time is it where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You enter Timbuktu through low mud brick gates just before dawn. Your feet take you toward one of the great learning centers of the region. Historians still argue whether the idea of a spherical Earth was commonly accepted in 14th century Timbuktu, but right now, you just listen. You pass a courtyard where a boy recites from memory something about heavenly spheres and eclipses. That doesn't mean everyone agrees. Oh no. West African scholarship at this time is vibrant, sometimes chaotic. Back in the market, you're offered a manuscript written in delicate Arabic script on soft, creased paper. As you duck into a shaded alcove to read, your fingers brush the fragile pages. A passing child watches you and then says, matter-of-factly, my uncle says the earth is on a turtle. The sun climbs higher and the air grows thick. The truth is, nobody here knows for sure what shape the earth is. By the time the moon rises again over Timbuktu's rooftops, you've heard at least 6 opinions about Earth's shape, all of them argued with conviction. You step through the worn archway of mosque just as the muezzin's call fades into the wind. Inside, the silence is dense, not the empty kind, but the kind thick with thought. You can almost hear the parchment fluttering before it even moves. This place isn't just a mosque, it's a library, a university. A kind of book cathedral, really, except the altars here are desks and the priests wear ink stains. The building breathes with its own rhythm, distant coughs, the scratch of reed pens, and the occasional sigh of someone realizing they've misquoted Al-Farghani again. A seemingly practical question, until it turns into a full-blown debate about Earth's shape. The text is worn, but the words pulse with meaning. Diagrams of the heavens. Circles within circles. Notations in the margins that are equal parts Arabic, Songhai, and eligible doodles. You follow a procession of students to a shaded courtyard where a lecture is taking place. The teacher, an elderly man with a long white scarf and eyebrows that deserve their own. Library wing gestures dramatically as he speaks. The earth is not floating nor fixed. It is in motion, like all things. But we feel it not one scholar brushes dust from a page with the sleeve of his robe. These aren't just texts, they're companions. Some are hundreds of years old, copied and recopied by hand, carried across dunes, soaked in sweat and spilled tea. Every smudge tells a story. Every diagram is a kind of wish, because we are bound to it. You shift on your mat, intrigued. Is this early inertia theory, or just poetic hand-waving? They just shift closer to each other, share lanterns, and keep debating about wrestling with the heavens using only ink, sand, and a stubborn belief that thinking hard enough might bring you closer to the stars. You hear someone argue that the earth must be round because the moon appears round. Someone else counters, so does bread. That shuts the room up for a solid 10 seconds. In one corner, someone has scribbled a tiny drawing of a globe, ... with legs. Is it a metaphor? A joke? A bet gone wrong? No one knows. A young librarian beams as he explains the classification system, which includes topics like the motions of celestial light, treatises on northern winds, and, inexplicably, why goats dislike Saturn. You raise an eyebrow? He shrugs. It's a long debate. If the earth is round, one says, then the shortest path to Mecca from here would curve north and east by the stars, not the sun. The other raises an eyebrow and says, but if it's flat, then we must aim by the sun's path at noon. What matters is how we measure, how we observe. Then he looks directly at you. Yes, Ewan says, but never forget, what we see is not all there is. The truth may be curved. You're not sure if that was philosophy, physics, or a bedtime threat, but it sends a tiny chill down your spine. A third chimes in with a grin, or we just listen to the old camel drivers. They never get lost. Everyone laughs, except the camel driver sitting nearby, who looks vaguely offended. You trail your fingers along the mud-plastered walls, duck beneath a low wooden beam. Find yourself in a vaulted room piled with manuscripts. No one stops you. Here, people assume you're reading with purpose, or at least with curiosity. You crouch beside a student probably no older than 14 who's copying diagrams of planetary motion. His parchment is covered with orbit lines and suns that look suspiciously like oranges. He points out a phrase with pride. According to the ancients, the earth rests in balance, as a jewel between two infinities. Others hint at alternative geometries of all earths, disk earths, even multi-layered cosmic eggs that make your head hurt just thinking about them. Historians still argue whether the scholars here fully grasped the implications of spherical Earth theory, or whether they accepted it as metaphorical. Either way, the conversation was alive. You nod, impressed. Then he adds, I wrote that part. Okay then, meet the next Ptolemy, but sassier. This isn't an isolated school. The scholars of Timbuktu, especially those based at, are plugged into a world of ideas. Through trade, pilgrimage, and correspondence, they share texts and arguments with centers of learning, from Morocco to Cairo to the Hijaz. They're reading Ibn Rushd al-Hazan, Ptolemy in Arabic, and occasionally, someone even sneaks in a bit of Hindu astronomy via translations that pass through Persia like intellectual stowaways, and the Earth still very much in question. Some of the texts stored here treat it as a sphere, echoing Islamic scholars like al-Biruni. You slide into a patch of shade and listen to two scholars discuss Qibla, the direction of Mecca. You're handed a manuscript by a scribe with fingers stained blue from indigo dye. Outside, the day grows hotter, continues. Some say the stars revolve around us. Others say we move around them. Later, you explore the storage room. Rows of leather-bound scrolls and palm leaf manuscripts rest in neat bundles. There's a tenderness in the way the manuscripts are handled. Cloth wraps. Careful untying. Whispers rather than shouts. As the sun sinks and the shadows stretch long over us walls, the scholars don't pack up. You smile. It's not about certainty. Not here. It's about wonder. By the time the sun peeks over the flat rooftops of Timbuktu again, you're already awake. Kif, you ever really slept? The air is cooler now, the sand less hostile. You step outside and follow the scent of charcoal smoke and boiled millet through narrow alleys. Your destination isn't a mosque this time. You duck inside his study, really more of a paper jungle, and nearly trip over a rolled-up map the size of a small fishing boat. He looks up from his desk, pushes his spectacles up the bridge of his nose, and mutters, You're late. You're not. It's just how he says hello. It's the modest home of Al-Fazazi, a respected geographer whose reputation precedes him like a camel caravan, dragging a very detailed map behind it. Historians still argue whether most local scholars accepted his spherical model, or whether he was a lone, patient voice scribbling in the margins of more traditional texts. This is the model from Al-Hazan, he says. Except I made a few changes. He points to a faint scribble on the outer ring, kind of modified astrolabe carved from wood, smoothed from years of use. This lets me measure how far south I am based on the angle of the midday sun, he explains. It's not perfect, but it tells me enough to know the Earth isn't flat. He's building something from fragments, layering them until the shape of the world emerges. Handmade, painted, a little dented from being dropped during a sandstorm. It's not entirely accurate. The oceans are too small. Some of them still think we're standing on a flat rug held down by stars. I don't blame them. Rugs are easier to imagine. That one's a Zanzari, she says confidently. And it's oddly convincing, because whether the Earth curves or not, the minds here clearly do. It tells you when goats shouldn't eat grass. You blink. It's true, she adds. Ask my uncle. You file it away. Add it to the pile. The continents look like they've melted slightly, but it curves. It turns. Somehow that's enough. Not through telescope or satellite, but through sheer stubborn curiosity. If it were, the sun's height wouldn't shift so cleanly as you move. Your brain hums with geometry, speculation, and a mild cheese headache. You glance up at the stars, wondering if they've always looked this curved. I added a boundary for the unknowable. Some people find that threatening. I find it comforting. It feels like magic, but it's just maths. Leapy, dusty, sunburned math. He was definitely not the loudest, or the most popular, but he was persistent. Salted goat cheese that you're 90% sure was invented to provoke your sinuses. He mentions offhand that he once tried to calculate the Earth's circumference. Using camel pace and prayer timing, it was off by quite a bit, he says, chewing thoughtfully. But it felt right. Somewhere a rooster insists it is the center of the universe. Frankly, based on how loudly it's crowing, it may believe it. The curvature of these paths is slight, but unmistakable. We follow the sun, he explains. We feel the bend, not in our feet, but in our timing. You don't fully understand it, but you believe he does. Circles, arcs, stars, A few lines are scratched out with what looks like mild contempt. He gestures for you to sit without looking, still working his way through a cluster of planetary labels. "This is what my teacher taught," he says. "But then I notice the stars." He taps a spot near the margin. They don't behave like they're circling a plate. They behave like they're circling a ball. One of them reads, Mercury. You cross into a quieter part of town, where the buildings are older and the doors carved with intricate geometric patterns, half-aesthetic flecks. Alpha Says isn't in the habit of giving lectures. He prefers diagrams to drama, parchment to podiums. But you've managed to snag an invitation. Spread out before him is a celestial chart in deep indigo ink. Alfazazi is among those convinced that the Earth is a sphere. Not because he wants it to be, not because someone told him it was, but because he's mapped it. Or at least tried to. And the maps don't quite make sense if the Earth is flat. Curved lines make more accurate distances. See routes appear shorter. The positions of stars shift as you move. All of it points to something round, annoyingly round. But his conviction isn't without struggle. Shows you an old diagram he inherited, one with a disc-shaped Earth and firm, unbending horizon lines. Still, not everyone agrees with Alfazazi. He shows you his favorite model next. A hand-drawn Earth surrounded by concentric celestial spheres, like ripples in space. You help him roll out a parchment showing trade routes across the Sahara, connecting cities like Gao, Jen, and Marrakesh. One point. He shows you a tool his own design. You try it for yourself. Hold it up. Squint through the sliver. Note the angle. There's a quiet moment where the two of you share a simple lunch. Flatbread. Dates. The truth is, his methods are a patchwork bits from Andalusian geometry, scraps of Greek logic, observations from desert journeys. As the sun lowers again, he shows you his proudest creation, a globe. "I made it for my students," he says. You leave his home just as twilight settles over the city. A nearby child notices your sky-gazing and points. Tonight you've sat with a man trying to prove the planet is round using nothing but stars, sand, and some very judgmental goats. By the time UVA had your third bowl of spiced millet and goat stewich, you're restarting to suspect is the only thing anyone eats here. You find yourself back in the shaded corridors of Timbuktu's market district. But today, you're not shopping for dried figs or amber beads. You're looking for paper. The man behind the counter looks like he hasn't blinked since the last eclipse. From a traveler who swore it was copied from a scroll translated in Damascus, from an original that came through India, maybe even Lanka. You take it reverently. The ink is faded, the parchment cracked. The title, roughly translated, reads, The Dancing Spheres of the Heavenly Order. Catchy. You greet him, and he nods toward a pile of manuscripts with the casual reverence one might reserve for sacred relics or very old lentils. Not just any paper. Paper that's traveled farther than most people ever will. Scrawled comments, corrections, doodles one that may or may not depict an astronomer being chased by a chicken. It contains a long passage about mapping the heavens onto the Earth. Using spherical coordinates, an advanced concept even by today's standards. But then in the margin, someone else added a skeptical note. But does this help with planting dates on time? And really, that's a fair point. These aren't just jokes. They're part of the conversation. The fact that so many ideas can exist at once, flat Earth, round Earth, Earth shaped like an egg in a windstorm, and no one flips the table. You watch him mutter calculations, only to pause halfway through and exclaim, Wait, is this in cubits or elbow lengths? The group falls silent. The answer may never be known. Scholars here didn't merely copy, they dialogued, even across centuries. You ask what it's for? He shrugs. Writing stars. If you listen closely, a passerby tells you, you can hear it humming. You put your ear to the wall. You've read about heavenly boats, invisible ladders to the stars, and one wild theory that the Earth is really the eye of a slumbering giant. Trying to understand, trying to connect stars to soil, theory to practice. And they're doing it not with degrees or labs, but with scrolls, suns, and the occasional goat. Honestly, it would explain the dust. There's nothing, but still you sort of hear it. You don't know if he means astronomy or poetry, but you buy a jar anyway. Manuscripts are littered with questions, but how can we know this? What if the moon is not a sphere, but a hollow drum? Needs further observation, especially during festivals. Paper that's whispered in Arabic, sung in Berber, shouted in Hebrew, and hummed softly in Sanskrit. They read Ptolemy through an African lens, critiqued Alhazen with desert-tested logic, and blended the speculative maps of Persia with oral traditions that predated them all. "I liked that one," he says, grinning. "Made the world feel poetic." Another describes a theory where the earth is flat but floating, held up by invisible winds that spiral from the breath of God. You nod? How does that work with gravity? He blinks. What's gravity, right? That hasn't been invented yet? You move on. Paper that somehow has made its way into the hands of scholars, who will use it not to wrap dates, but to wrap their minds around the cosmos. Some claim the scholars here had grand unifying visions of cosmology. Others argue they were simply curious and very, very good at repurposing foreign theories into local contexts. It discusses the debate over celestial spheres, whether they are solid, crystalline layers, holding stars like studs in Velvetor, merely imagined paths the stars follow in space. One student shakes his head. If they're solid, how do comets pass through them? The teacher, chewing on a stick of cinnamon, says calmly, "Perhaps the comets are messengers who walk between walls." You're starting to think it was both. Sort of intellectual jazz, riffing on what came before. You arrive at a stall that seems to sell nothing but scrolls. One is copying out an Andalusian treatise on stellar parallax, pausing now and then to frown at the angle of the sun outside. Another is painstakingly illustrating planetary orbits with a compass and ruler that look like they've seen some things. The third is quietly muttering to himself while footnoting a passage that describes the moon as a cold mirror floating in divine soup. Bold imagery, respect. He speaks softly. These came from Tlemcen, these from Fez. And this one, he holds it up carefully. This is the real treasure of Timbuktu, its paper trail.
Ow.
Scholars here didn't just receive knowledge from the Islamic world, they transformed it. Historians still argue whether this intellectual fusion was deliberate synthesis or happy accident. You're led to a scriptorium below. Windowless room where 3 scribes sit, cross-legged amid piles of papyrus and parchment. You kneel beside them, peering at the margins. And it's there that you see the real heart of scholarly debate. The notes. You're handed a text attributed to Al-Khwarizmi, by way of Toledo, by way of someone's uncle. One scribe tells you he once saw a manuscript where the world was shaped like a snail, shell spiraling out from Mecca, with oceans folding over themselves like blue ribbons. Out in the alley, a boy is selling ink made from boiled date pits and gum Arabic. You join a small study circle where students are reading aloud a letter from a scholar in Cairo. This is where the knowledge lives, not just in the texts, but in the tension between them. Someone reads from a text by Al-Zarqali, describing the Earth's diameter, and tries to match the numbers using a dusty abacus. You pass by a wall where someone's drawn the Earth as a giant drum, its skin taut with the vibration of stars. By nightfall, you have seen texts that argue for everything from a rotating spherical Earth to a stationary flat one with edges curling slightly upward like the rim of a ceremonial bowl. Yet through all the disagreement, one thing is clear. These people are trying. And you? You're now deep in a place where books can be maps, and maps can be prayers. And prayers can be scribbled diagrams with awkwardly lopsided moons. You rise with the sun again and find yourself following a small group of students out beyond the walls of Timbuktu. They're carrying bundles, sticks, cords, a beaten-up metal bowl, and what looks like a suspiciously straight length of wood. You're not entirely sure where you're going, but someone mentions measuring the world, and who can say no to that? You arrive at a clearing where the sand lies smooth and untouched. No donkey tracks, no impatient goats. A student kneels with a piece of twine, measuring the shadow's length precisely as it hits its shortest point. They jot down numbers, angles, then repeat the process a few feet away with another stick. It's like Stonehenge, but with better snacks. Just a quiet stretch of earth waiting to be interrogated. Measure the angle of the sun's rays at 2 different places. Then calculate the curvature of the earth using geometry, time, and a willingness to squint into blazing light. She's scribbling calculations on a strip of leather. If the earth is round, she muses, then the sun must strike it differently in Gen than it does here. That means we could find our place by watching the shadows. She looks up at you, eyes bright. Imagine no more guessing where we are. No more wandering. just sun and thought. And the best part kind of works, naturally, because when you're not sure whether the earth is round, you start with a stick and a question. Because for a few hours, the great curve of the earth didn't feel like a myth. From up here, I see farther. That must mean the earth is not flat, the way it casts long shadows at dusk. The way it creeps along a wall, circle with the sun overhead and two stick figures measuring shadows. Beneath it is written, in Arabic, if the sun bends its gaze, the earth must bow its back. Poetic. Maybe even a little smug, but probably true. You begin to realize the world is telling you its shape all the time. You just have to know how to listen. Someone hands you a small baked cake with honey, and you take a bite as the sun disappears behind the walls. Just shadows, laughter, and the quiet ticking of the earth beneath their feet. Sweet, grainy, a little unexpected, much like today's conclusion. Everyone laughs. Then he adds, but then he fell down the other side, so maybe not the best data point. It felt like math, sunlight, and the patience of those willing to ask the sky for secrets. He tilts one gourd toward the sun. The shadow shifts. He rotates it. The shadow bends. You realize that here? Science isn't rigid. It's fluid like the dunes themselves. It's about watching patiently, trusting your senses, then asking again and again. The earth, he says, may be like this. Curved, moving. Not a flat plate, but a bowl turned slowly by the hands of time. Everyone nods, even though someone's pebble just rolled into the stew pot. The lead student, a lanky young man with a turban tied like he invented turbans, begins organizing the group. It's not clear if the technique arrived via Egypt through Andalusia, or by oral retellings from wandering pilgrims who liked math. He looks up. I've tried it. It's true. But then again, sometimes I forget to check. Fair enough. What is clear is that the method endured. The idea of a round earth lingered, even when it wasn't official dogma. One thinks the earth is slightly egg-shaped. Another suspects it's round, but sitting on something. A third insists it's flat, but wobbly like a goat with 3 legs. That one gets the biggest laugh. He places a tall stick in the ground, then steps back and squints like he's expecting it to perform. You ask what's happening. He smiles. We're measuring the sun's shadow at noon. As the morning passes, the sun climbs, the shadow shortens. This isn't just a classroom exercise. It's an old technique, one that echoes the method used by Eratosthenes over 1,500 years earlier in Egypt. Of course, there's a twist. The instruments aren't perfect. One shadow is a little crooked, because a beetle decided to climb the stick halfway through the reading. Another student may have measured in fingers instead of handspans, but even with errors, the results suggest a subtle curve, not enough to roll a melon across, but enough to whisper. Maybe, just maybe, we're on a sphere. Historians still debate whether West African scholars at the time were reproducing Eratosthenes' method intentionally, or simply stumbled into it through necessity. You sit with one of the students under a sparse acacia tree. You nod, impressed. Then she adds, of course, you still might get eaten by a lion. Perspective, nearby. A teacher is explaining the geometry of spheres using 2 gourds and a handful of pebbles. There's something meditative about it, the rhythm of sun, shadow, and speculation. A boy beside you shares his theory. If the earth is round, then when I walk east, the stars should rise sooner. As the sun begins its descent, the group gathers their tools. The shadows grow longer, now sharper, bolder. The students chatter about their findings. You pack up with them, but your mind stays back with the stick, the shadow, the angle. As you walk back to the city, the teacher tells a story about a scholar who once climbed a tall dune and declared, even so, the idea takes root. Every time you see the sun now, you notice its angle. Back in Timbuktu, someone has drawn a new diagram in the sand near the market gate. You pause at the gate, the evening breeze tugging at your robe. Because yesterday you watched students prove something ancient using only sticks and light. And no one shouted. No one declared themselves the final authority. It's late. The streets of Timbuktu are quieter now, save for the occasional donkey braying into the wind like it has unfinished business. It's that kind of place. A gathering of minds rather than credentials. Space where doubt is a sign of intelligence and silence is permission to think. You wander past sleeping stalls and closed shutters, drawn toward the sound of voices murmuring through a half-open wooden door. Earth. again. But not the version Alfazazi gave you, measured, diagrammed, slowly proven. A few heads nod. When the fish stirs, we feel it: earthquakes, storms, shifting sands. This is something older. Something more conditional. The earth, he says, is like a drum. Flat, yes, but when the ancestors speak, it rings. And that ring carries through the stars. One man even describes the earth as a seed within the fruit of time, which, frankly, you'd read that book. A few people close their eyes, not in disagreement, just in quiet acceptance. There are maps for merchants, she says, and maps for the soul. One needs distances. The other needs meaning. She taps her chest. This world flat or round is still only a mirror of the greater one. Inside, oil lamps flicker against thick adobe walls, illuminating a circle of elders seated on woven mats. Their tone is low, measured more lullaby than lecture. We've heard the arguments, he begins, that the earth is a sphere, spinning quietly through the heavens. He leans forward. You sit politely, trying not to cough, and nod as the discussion continues. What shape the earth takes in your mind depends so much on the stories you've heard, the stars you've followed, the shadows you've measured, the elders you've trusted. In this room, flat isn't foolish. It's familiar, functional, a canvas for belief systems and ancestral order. A way to locate yourself in a universe where certainty is rare and metaphor is king. If the earth is flat, where does the sun go at night? It was simply one more voice in a room full of songs. The griot smiles. It returns to the well of beginnings. The lamps dim. A few people drift off where they sit. No one rushes to end the evening. The debate simply quiets, like a tide going out. There, it drinks the night and is reborn. You wonder if they're watching. Amused by the endless attempts below to chart what lies above. The boy furrows his brow. But what if it just goes around? The griot shrugs. Sorting the earth through poetry and comparison, using tools that measure not just distance, but dignity. Then we must chase it until we find out. Different ways of aligning the visible with the invisible. But what if it isn't? You slip in and no one looks surprised. Another claims to have seen the edge of the world in a dream and that it smelled like cinnamon and regret. The room laughs gently. But if that were true, wouldn't our maps change every time the fish moved? It's the kind of diagram that means everything to those who live within it, and very little to those who don't. The old man chuckles. They do. That's why we keep redrawing them. It's if everyone is holding the idea like a hot stone, testing its weight. Tonight's discussion? A man with a beard that deserves its own manuscript clears his throat. There's no scoffing, no smugness, just a pause. He continues. My grandfather taught me that the world rests on the back of a great fish, swimming through waters so deep, even stars cannot light them. Here, cosmologies aren't always trying to explain physical mechanics. They're trying to explain meaning, structure, order, the difference between where you are and who you are in relation to the universe. A younger scholar, barely 30, full of diagrams and reason, smiles gently. You can't help but grin. It's not science as you know it, but it is cosmology, a worldview. That matters. Historians still argue whether flat Earth models persisted out of scientific ignorance or cultural symbolism. In West Africa, it's rarely a binary. Another speaker chimes in. This one, a griotha, storyteller-historian hybrid, who guards memory with rhyme and rhythm. You sit cross-legged, listening as cosmologies unfold like embroidered cloth. A flat Earth floating on wind, a disk wrapped in sky serpents, a square world bounded by fire. The room fills with stories not all consistent, not all meant to be. That's the point. These aren't contradictions, they're constellations of thought. One woman, seated with quiet authority, finally speaks. Her voice is steady. Someone brings out a bowl of ginger tea so strong, it could probably scrub barnacles off a dhow. A boy, barely 12, raises a hand. It's both bedtime story and epistemology. And strangely, it holds up. One man tells of a journey into the forest where the trees grew in spirals, and he became convinced the world must also spiral. You glance at the walls. Painted there, in faded ochre, is a depiction of the earth. not as a map but as a pattern. Interlocking loops, swirls. And that's the trick, isn't it? You remember Alphazazi's Globit's gentle curve, its flawed C's? And you realize now it wasn't made to erase these other models? As the conversation winds down, someone begins to hum a slow, circling tune that seems to echo the rhythm of a walking caravan. You step outside into the cool night. The stars are sharp, like pinholes in black cloth. Back in your own time, someone would call this gathering pseudoscience, but here it's just ... thinking, dreaming. And somehow tonight that feels like enough. The morning starts with the sound of a drum, not a performance, more of a message. A slow, steady rhythm echoing through the dusty streets of Timbuktu like a heartbeat beneath the sand. At the center, two scholars face each other with the kind of exaggerated calm that only exists before intellectual war breaks out. One is tall and thin, dressed in pale blue robes that look like they've never seen a wrinkle. The younger one is Musa ibn Hamad, known for favoring mathematical models and Greek geometries. The elder is Sheikh Ahmad al-Duri, a traditionalist with a talent for metaphors and a voice like slow thunder. The other is older, compact, with the dry patience of someone who has been correcting people since before they were born. He draws a circle in the sand and starts describing how ships disappear over the horizon bottom first, then sail. How? He asks. Can this be explained unless the Earth curves? A few in the crowd murmur agreement. We think we are the center because we measure from ourselves. One man leans back and mutters, "If the Earth is spinning, why do my goats not fall off?" A woman next to him slaps his arm lightly. "Because your goats have balance, fool." But that does not make it true. He sketches a model of the Earth with the sun orbiting, probably all three. But here the goal isn't two units to demonstrate, to model thinking, questioning, listening. Is a carpet not flat? He asks. Musa counters with another verse that mentions the Earth being like an egg. And eggs are round, he adds with a smirk. Laughter ripples through the crowd. You'd think someone just roasted Aristotle. We used to believe the stars rotated around us. But now, many scholars agree. It is we who turn. It's a subtle reminder whether you believe in a flat Earth or a spherical one. Time moves. Light moves. Understanding is something you chase, not something you corner. Al-Duri smiles. Perhaps a carpet may cover a curved floor. It's about walking a little further together, letting the horizon rise to meet you. The crowd applauds, not a wild ovation, but a soft ripple of appreciation. Not because you're trying to pick a winner, but because each idea added a layer, a texture to your mental map of this world. A little curve here, a little story there. It's a question of rhythm, of how we move through it and how it moves through us. An elder stands and says, "The Earth may be round or flat, or unknowable, but today our minds turned. It's cheesy. It's lovely. About learning to stretch your understanding without snapping it in half." Musa nods, or perhaps what we see is one part of something greater. He continues, invoking the works of al-Biruni, the angle of sunbeams at different latitudes, even the way lunar eclipses cast a curved shadow on the moon. You follow it because at this point, that's what you do. Someone brings up a merchant who claimed to sail so far west he ended up back east. Another recounts a story of a bird that flew for months and returned from the opposite direction, exhausted but triumphant. So either the Earth is round, the speaker says, or the bird got very, very lost. If the Earth were round, he begins, then the stars above Timbuktu should not be the same as those above Gao. Yet we both see the same ones. Musa raises a finger to interject, but the elder holds up a hand. Let me finish. No one storms off. No one raises their voice. Even disagreement is offered with a bow and a proverb. Respect is a non-negotiable currency here, and it leads you to the wide central plaza, where something unusual is happening. A public debate. You arrive to find a half-moon of spectators seated on mats, wrapped in turbans, sipping tea. The topic, you guessed it. The shape of the Earth. You squeeze in beside a family passing around dates, and someone whispers the names of the speakers. Musa begins with flair. Then al-Duri steps forward, calm and deliberate. Al-Duri offers a different explanation. Perhaps the Earth is vast, flat, and the sky moves. Perhaps what seems like curvature is merely distance and light. He gestures to the heavens. Do the stars not circle us? Are we not their center? You can almost hear a camel snort at the drama of it. Musa responds patiently. This is where the crowd gets divided. Some nod, impressed. Others frown. Historians still argue whether these public debates were primarily educational, political, or theatrical. The conversation turns to scriptural interpretation. Aldry quotes a verse that describes the earth as spread out like a carpet. A boy nearby asks, "Can both be true?" And for a moment, everyone pauses. It's that moment, that pause, that tells you what this is really about. Not geometry, not even cosmology. It's about holding multiple truths. The debate continues with references to wind patterns, sailing routes, and star charts. Throughout, the tone remains gentle, playful, and deeply respectful. You watch as the sun arcs overhead. The shadow of a nearby pillar shortens, then begins to stretch the other way. As the debate winds down, the two speakers clasp hands. You walk away slowly, replaying the arguments in your head. By now, you've come to expect that knowledge here isn't about proving others wrong. And as the drum resumes its gentle beat, you realize the earth isn't just a question of shape. You find yourself reclining under a cloth canopy, the kind that flaps lazily in the dry heat. A small brass kettle sits in the center of the group, steam curling from its spout like a desert snake rising to a flute. You're at someone's home, a griot's compound, just off the quieter edge of Timbuktu's bustle. The griotic wool part storyteller, historian, and neighborhood DJ waves you closer. His name is, and his voice flows like the river Niger when it's full, confident, and slow. No one asks for a citation. Here metaphor is evidence. Tea, sweet enough to jolt a camel back to life, is poured high from above to create that frothy top end, to show off a little. Let's be honest. You're not in a scholarly courtyard or library today. He leans back on a woven mat, his eyes half-lidded, and begins a tale that winds like desert smoke. Not a lecture, a story. The stars cling to the inner walls, and the sun dances along the rim. But as you listen, you start to suspect that the distinction didn't matter much here. When it spills over the edge, that is night. A child nearby gasps in delight. A man chuckles. A reminder that cosmology was once about purpose, not precision. The question is, what sits in yours? Then the stars fall into the stew, and we all become dreams. So what happens when it tips all the way over? Round, yes, but not hard like stone, hollow, like a drum that echoes the Creator's breath. The universe, he says, gesturing with a wooden spoon still dripping stew, is like a calabash, smooth on the outside, deep on the inside. You picture stars clinging to the curve of its ceiling like lanterns in a tent. You imagine the ancestors stirring weather into the clouds, seasoning history with thunder. And somehow it feels realer than real. About a man who tried to leave the earth by building a ladder of baobab trunks. He climbed for 7 days and 7 nights, says, but never reached the stars. But on the 8th, he looked down, and earth was gone. That's when he realized the stars had always been inside him. Everyone nods. You taste it in the cumin-spiced millet, smell it in the wood smoke, hear it in the way a grandmother ends a sentence with, and maybe what matters isn't the answer, but how gently you ask the question, and that's why the river sings. When the wind runs the rim of the bowl, he says, storms are born. Another adds, and if the stars are seeds, the galaxy must be the garden. Someone mutters, a garden that needs weeding, and everyone groans. Not religious verse, but a riddle. If the earth curves and water flows down, why does the ocean not fall? You watch as an older cousin begins to explain gravity with the help of 2 pebbles, a spoon, and a goat skull. Honestly, it makes more sense than your middle school physics teacher. He begins painting a picture with words. The calabash is earth, sky, and stars all in one. Inside the shell we live. Ah, grins. That is when the ancestors come to stir the pot. You're not sure what to make of it. The Earth's shape, isn't just a geometry problem. Est part of a living story shaped by song, rain, and the look in someone's eyes when they talk about the stars. About seeing the world not only as a thing you measure, but a place you belong. Is this allegory? Just as the human body holds rhythms, so does the earth. Just as you dream, so does the sky. Cosmology. You realize it shares strange echoes with certain dome cosmologies, where a curved sky encloses a human world. Similar ideas exist in Babylonian tablets, Norse myths, even medieval European models, except theirs had angels. This version has talking crocodiles. Dessert serving time, but the magic lies in the overlap. In this oral tradition, the physical and the spiritual aren't kept in separate boxes. They breathe together. And here's the thing, the calabash model. It's not as far off as it sounds. Historians still argue whether these storytelling traditions were meant to describe reality or simply explain morality. Everything round has a center, continues. It's as much a spiritual question as it is scientific. A boy with a half-eaten mango pipes up. What if the calabash cracks? Everyone laughs. Even the fire seems to snort. Doesn't he miss a beat? As you chew on that, someone brings out a wooden board inscribed with Arabic script. Meanwhile, an uncle nearby insists the calabash model explains weather patterns better than any scroll. This is how knowledge travels here, not locked in parchment, but kneaded into jokes, tales, and food. You lean back and imagine the earth as a gourd, hollow and humming, because this isn't about disproving math. It's about layering truth. Strangely enough, the calabash aligns with a deeper idea floating through ancient and medieval African philosophy, the belief that what exists on the macro scale also echoes in the micro. Later that night, as the fire burns low, tells you one last tale. You don't ask whether it's true. You just close your eyes and let the warmth sink in. Because maybe the earth is round, or curved like a bowl, or hollow like a song. You wake before sunrise, stirred by the chill that sneaks under wool blankets and the quiet clatter of camels being saddled. The sky is still ink black, but the stars blaze overhead like tiny holes punched through parchment. But it's more than a physical trial. It's a conveyor belt of ideas. And tucked among the bundles of dates and leather waterskins are manuscripts, astrolabes, and minds teeming with cosmological debate. You stretch, sip thick coffee from a brass cup, and pull on your travel cloak. Beside you rides an imam named Salif, draped in blue and gold. He's already lecturing a much younger scholar in training on planetary motion between sneezes. Desert dust, you learn, is the great equalizer. Today, you join a caravan not of traders this time, but pilgrims. The Hajj is no small journey. From Timbuktu to Mecca spans thousands of kilometers across treacherous sands, bandit country, and rival emirates. Every so often, a break is called for prayer, for tea, or for debates that spring up faster than you can say helium. You overhear fragments. You mount a camel that is somehow both grumpy and wise, and settle into the swaying rhythm that will define your next few weeks. Look, he says, if you place Mecca here, and Timbuktu here, and Damascus over here, he dots each with a pebble. The shortest route curves. Why? Because the earth curves. You've asked that very question once, possibly while brushing your teeth. Use a flat surface, and the path is straight. As the caravan lurches forward, Salif mutters, you know, the earth can't be flat. That's why the horizon hides things. Ships vanish, bottom first, gravity. Or, if you prefer the poetic version of Ein Balance, it where water would just spill off the edge every time someone sneezed. And suddenly, you remember what the Grayat said about the calabash, about stars clinging to the bowl's inner curve. But today, it feels like the great round earth is being re-argued on camelback. Still might be. So either the stars are all playing hide-and-seek, or the earth is turning. But now I know they move. Salif sits beside you again, now mellowed by fatigue and mint tea. You know, he says softly, when I was a boy, I thought the stars were angels. Later, while rubbing your sore knees, you hear a merchant explaining that beyond the known world is a wall of smoke where the sun sets and the sky cracks. He's adamant, claims he saw it once during a sandstorm. You try to imagine yourself walking across a vast, round earth, its surface curving beneath your feet, each step tilting you ever so slightly towards some invisible center. They change with latitude. They vanish and reappear with precision. They bend around the curve. And the low grumbling of your camel, who probably doesn't care whether the earth is roundly, that the sand is soft, it makes your head spin. Or maybe that's just the altitude. The younger man scoffs. But if it's round, why don't we fall off? Shouldn't people upside down be tumbling into the sky? It's with figs? Because even while pondering the nature of the universe, one must never skip figs. You suppress a smile. Salif sighs dramatically. The caravan rolls along, weaving through sandstone outcrops. But Aristotle said heavier objects seek the center. His lines include astronomical tables, prayer times aligned with stellar movement, and a short paragraph about the angle of the Earth's axis. None of this would be possible if the world were flat.
You're Ibn al-Shatir, who thought the earth spun and change rarely brings peace.
But didn't that monk in Marrakesh say the stars were fixed jewels? You get the sense that astronomy and theology are the twin suns around which this entire journey revolves. At one rest stop, an older scholar sketches circles in the sand with a reed. You nod, but another pilgrim pipes up. That's only because we're measuring wrong. This earns groans. Someone throws a date pit. A third voice chimes in. Well, the Earth is clearly a sphere, or, says a man sharpening his knife, they're being eaten by sea beasts. Ever think of that? You decide not to ask him to elaborate. Historians still argue whether such pilgrim caravans were major sources of scientific exchange, or mostly gossip and goat logistics. Night falls like a velvet curtain, and the caravan halts under a sky so clear it feels like fiction. What do you think now? You ask. He shrugs. You glance up. The sky is in motion, silent and huge, stars rotating like the dome of a celestial mosque. Funny how metaphors and measurements often land in the same place. Salif continues, navigation proves it. Sailors, camel drivers, we use the stars to guide us, and they change as we move. So that means we're moving, he chuckles. And yet when I say that at the mosque, half the elders grumble. You think they don't believe it? You ask. They believe in peace, he says. At a nearby campfire, a scribe is copying verses onto parchment, using soot and gum Arabic for ink. But still, there are holdouts. Salif listens, then whispers. People will always prefer what they see to what they're told. And who can blame them? You lie back on your blanket that night, eyes wide open. But here's what's true. Whether you believe in a flat plane, a tilted sphere, a calabash, or a cosmic dome, the stars above do not lie. You fall asleep to the faint laughter of pilgrims, the slow sigh of wind through tents. Tomorrow, the debate will continue, probably over breakfast. You leave Cairo with your sandals worn thin and your mind buzzing, like a beehive stuffed with scrolls. But the road waits for no philosopher, and soon you're winding through the Levant, carried by the caravan's slow, swaying rhythm. Damascus emerges from the haze like a mirage you didn't expect to be real. Marble courtyards, jasmine-scented breeze, and calligraphy so precise it feels like it's whispering poetry directly to your eyelids. You let it wrap around you this place. This rhythm, and eventually, it leads you to a small, square library tucked behind a spice market. Inside, scholars mutter in 6 languages. You spot diagrams on parchment pinned to the walls. Eclipses, astrolabes. She believes it moves. And one particularly chaotic sketch that looks like someone tried to draw the universe while riding a horse. You meet Layla there, not a scribe or merchant, but a mathematician. She's mapping the motion of stars from a rooftop above the mosque, trying to chart the heavens so precisely that, as she puts it, not even an angel could argue with me. Layla doesn't just believe the earth is round. I say they knew. They just didn't want to lose their heads. Not everyone in the empire is so forgiving of ideas that unseat ancient dogmas. It's a notion that earth moves well. That can move more than just orbits. It can shake empires. Now, practically knocks on my chimney? You mean it spins? You ask, lowering your voice as if the walls might protest. She nods. You know, I met a man once who said the earth floats on water, 'cause for some, earth still sits on pillars, or rests atop a cosmic whale. And in some corners of the world, those myths still hold sway, like a raft. I asked him what happens if it tips. He just blinked and said, "Don't sneeze too hard." "Look," she whispers, "each ring describes a layer of the cosmos. Now tell me, is this something that sits still? It has to. Otherwise the stars would dance in impossible ways." You blink. This feels like Heresiond, yet here she is, calmly grinding ink and sketching celestial arcs. "We treated the earth as a sphere," so we could face the Kaaba from any point on it. Historians still argue, she says with a knowing smirk. Whether the early Muslim astronomers really thought the Earth moved or just played with the math, you consider that? Later, she shows you a brass armillary sphere, every ring etched with inscriptions. It spins gently under her fingers. She grins, and you realize she's found joy in this mystery. You're not the only one curious. At a tea shop across the street, an elderly merchant insists on telling you how the constellations have shifted in his lifetime. Back in my day, he says, squinting into his cup, Orion rose just above the neighbor's roof. You nod sympathetically, even though you suspect it's the roof that's changed. Then he leans in. You laugh, but it sticks in your throat. But not here. Not in Layla's world. That night, you return to the rooftop, watching her adjust a handmade quadrant. She says, "They always imagine we prayed toward Mecca using guesswork, but we had geometry, shadows, star positions." You pause, letting that sink in. "Even in worship," she continues, "we depended on roundness." You lie back, staring at the heavens. Polaris above you, unwavering. Below it, Damascus dozing in moonlight. Layla is already calculating something in the dark. You wonder if she dreams in equations. And as your eyes drift shut, you think again about what it means to argue over Earth's shape. It's not just about where you are. It's about how you know it. About trust, observation, faith, doubt, and sometimes about stars that refuse to lie. Morning finds you tangled in a wool blanket on Layla's rooftop. The scent of cumin and morning bread wafting from somewhere below. You rub your eyes and remember today. You're headed back toward the west. Home, not quite, but closer. You ride with a smaller caravan this time. Traders mostly, some carrying perfumes, others dense bundles of indigo-dyed fabric. You still don't feel the roundness, but your doubt begins to soften like wax in sunlight. Then, near the coast, your direction shifts. You sail. You've heard whispers of an elder scholar here, someone who spent his life measuring Earth not in miles, but in minutes and shadows. Over mint tea, he tells you about the geographers of old Daladrisi, who mapped the known world with astonishing accuracy. Mal-Biruni, who calculated Earth's radius to within 1% of modern figures using nothing more than a stick, a mountain, and an obsession with angles. They forget who held the torch when Europe was asleep. You find him in a modest, whitewashed house, surrounded by sundials and stacks of yellowing paper. The Mediterranean is not always kind, but today she's lazy. Rolling gently under the wooden hull of a creaky merchant ship bound for Africa, not everywhere, not by everyone, but certainly among the learned. One man claims to have a monkey that can play chess. Don't ask for a demonstration. Some myths are best left untested. Another in who wrote about the stars' positions changing as you moved north or south clear evidence. He believed that Earth curved like a gourd. It's tempting to see this as proof. Surely a spherical Earth would offer some curve, right? A giant globe sits there, patched together from wood and hammered copper. The Earth isn't just round. It wobbles a little under your touch. It's in motion always. Lines etched across it show trade routes, wind patterns, rivers. He spins it slowly. Through Aleppo, through Antioch, your path follows old Roman roads. It returns again and again, dressed in new languages, new robes, but it always returns. The sea air clears your mind. You stare at the horizon for hours, flat, vast, unmoving. But then you remember what the scholars taught you, how the curve is subtle. How tall ships vanish mast first. How lunar eclipses always cast round shadows. The air is warm, the night breeze tinged with salt and oranges. But maybe, just maybe, that's part of the magic. And you wonder how many others and how many cities have stared up at the same sky and wondered if their feet were truly planted on a sphere spinning through endless night. When you dock in Tunis, the minarets greet you like old friends. He's called Al-Makri. His knees crack when he stands, but his mind is sharper than a blade of Damascene steel. "You know," Al-Makri says, tapping a fingernail on the table, "some people still think all this is European knowledge. Copernicus, Galileo." You nod, remembering manuscripts you've seen copied and recopied across libraries, passed like sacred secrets, from to Cairo. And yet he continues, with a rueful smile, "Some of our own forgot too. That's the tragedy." You ask him about the debates, how widely this knowledge traveled. Were these round earth arguments truly known across West Africa? "Oh yes," he says. He mentions a scholar in Gao who used lunar observations to predict the flooding of the Niger. Historians still argue, he adds, whether these thinkers truly grasped the full implications, or if they were adapting inherited models without full belief. You ask what he believes. I believe, he says, staring out at the sky turning gold, that truth travels in spirals. That night, he takes you out to the courtyard. See this, he says. You reach out and stop the globe with one finger. For a moment, you feel like you're holding the whole world steady. Then a cat jumps onto the table and knocks over a sundial. So much for cosmic dignity. You both laugh, and he shoos the cat away with a muttered prayer and a piece of bread. As you prepare to leave, he hands you a scroll. Nothing ancient or groundbreaking, just a simple drawing. A traveler under the stars. Above him a curved horizon. He looks like you, Almakri says, chuckling. You tuck it into your bag. On your walk back through the moonlit alleys of Tunis, the stone glows silver underfoot. Still can't feel the movement. You leave Tunis just before dawn, following a spice-laden caravan moving southwest. The camels grunt, the bells on their necks chime in uneven rhythms, and your feet ache before the sun even rises fully. But you don't mind. There's something comforting about being part of a slow procession, like the earth itself turning under you. Your next stop is the city of Tlemcen. It's smaller than Cairo, quieter than Timbuktu, but carries its own quiet elegance. Winding alleyways, walls covered in Zeli tilework, and markets that smell of mint, leather, and roasted almonds. You find lodging in a room above a tailor's shop. The tailor is a widow who invites you to dinner without much preamble. Over chickpea stew and flatbread, she tells you of her grandfather, who once studied astronomy in Fez. He used to talk about the stars like they were cousins, she says, folding cloth with quick, precise hands. Said if you watched long enough, they'd whisper their secrets. But only if you were patient. The next day, you catch wind of a manuscript kept at the old mosque's library, a curious one. It's supposedly a partial translation of Ptolemy's Almagest, with West African annotations added in the margins. A merchant leads you to the place in exchange for a few bolts of dyed cotton. The library's cool, thick with the smell of dust and goatskin. You find the manuscript brittle, bound in faded red leather, the ink running thin in places. But the margins are alive. In the spaces around Ptolemy's dense tables of star positions, someone likely a 14th century Fulani scholar named Umar bin Yakuba has scribbled notes in fluid Arabic. May Allah reward Al-Farghani. One note begins. Referencing the famed 9th century astronomer whose works circulated widely in the Sahel, another margin simply reads, "The stars rise sooner when we travel north. This cannot be on a flat plane." You trace the handwriting with your finger, feeling the centuries blur. Someone sat here, maybe in this very building, trying to bridge the Greek texts with his own sky, trying to understand. It's humbling. But here's the kicker: historians still argue whether Ben Yakuba believed the earth was round or simply repeated the models without conviction. Was it intellectual ritual, or was it true belief, constrained by the limitations of parchment and night skies? You wish you could ask him. Later, over coffee that could raise the dead, you listen to a griota sing, a tale of a hunter who chased the sun across the sky, convinced it was a flaming antelope. In the end, the hunter dies of exhaustion, and the sun remains forever just out of reach. The earth's secret, the griot says, winking at you, is that it never runs, it spins. You wonder how many children heard that story and lay awake wondering what the world really looked like beneath their feet. You move on to Fez, next to city of green-tiled. Minarets and leather tanneries that smell like vinegar and iron. The university, the Ral Karun, is old enough to make Oxford look like a toddler. You attend a lecture on astrology disguised as a debate on trade winds. Apparently, people still tread carefully when blending science and belief. After class, a student invites you to dinner. His room is chaos scrolls, ink pots, a small telescope poking out the window like a curious goose. He shows you a diagram he's drawn. It's an attempt to map the known world on a sphere, inspired by both Ptolemy and illiteracy. But unlike the others, he's added cities from oral accounts, Tadmeka, Walata, even a mysterious jungle city he calls Zinja. I don't know if it exists, he admits, scratching his beard. But people speak of it. You smile. That's half of history, really. Stories we're not sure are real, but which still shape the maps. You spend a week copying that diagram by hand. It's clumsy, beautiful, and strangely familiar. He's drawn the Earth not just as a globe, but as a living thing, pulsing with human movement, trade, gossip, hope. As you leave Fez, a child offers to sell you a lizard for 1 dirham. You decline politely. He throws in a scorpion. You run. At the city's edge, a beggar in a patched wool cloak stops you. "Do you know where you are?" he asks. You nod. "Fez." "No," he says, tapping his temple. "Here, on the earth." You blink. Then he laughs and walks away. The wind picks up. Clouds roll in from the west, and you realize you've walked halfway across a continent, chasing shadows and arguments, looking for proof that the earth is round. But maybe it's not just about shape. Maybe it's about seeing how people, across cultures and centuries, looked up and asked the same question, and sometimes even found the same answer, even if they didn't always agree on what it meant. You reach the southern edge of the Sahara with dust still clinging to your robes and old questions still rattling in your head. The last stop before you retrace your steps is the city of resting like a mirage by the Bani River. Its mudbrick mosque rises like melted candle wax, majestic, surreal, and sun-baked into silence. You arrive on market day. The square is alive with color and sound traders shouting prices. Women stacking pyramids of millet, a boy selling carved wooden birds that flap when you pull a string. You buy one. It breaks. You don't mind. You're here for something quieter. Behind the mosque, past rows of clay homes, sits a small scriptorium. Inside, scribes are hunched over manuscripts so old even the dust has seniority. One man, with ink-stained fingers and a face carved by sun and time, waves you in like he's been expecting you for years. "You've come to see the maps," he says. You're led to a bundle wrapped in goatskin. When he peels it open, the smell of age hits you like a dry wind, pungent, earthy, real. What you see isn't quite a map. It's more like a dream made of ink. Rivers don't follow gravity. Cities float where stories say they should be. But one thing is clear. The lines curve, not straight. In the corner is a marginal note, written in Tamashek script. The world is round, as Allah makes no corners. You look up at the scribe. This was from here? He nods. Copied 3 times since the 1500s. The original came from Zhao. Some say even further east. You sit down. It's not because you're tired, though. You are but because your legs forget how to stand. For weeks you've been chasing a question. Now finally you're holding its many answers in your lap. The scribe chuckles. "Do you know," he says, "some people used to think the earth sat on the back of a great fish?" You raise an eyebrow, like a cosmic tilapia. He grins. "Something like that?" But even then, they imagined motion. It just didn't have the words. Historians still argue whether these cartographic quirks meant people truly believed in a round earth or whether they just found curves prettier than squares. Maybe some followed Greek models blindly. Maybe others reached the conclusion themselves, by starlight and sand. What's clear is this. West African thinkers weren't passive inheritors of knowledge. They debated. They corrected. They dreamed. You spend a few days copying fragments. The scribe shows you his tools. Sharpened reeds, pigment from crushed acacia pods, powdered lapis from traders who wandered farther than you ever will. He tells you of his great-grandfather, who walked to Timbuktu with a bundle of scrolls tied to his back, stopping at every town to trade a verse of poetry for food. He didn't call himself a scholar. He called himself a question with feet. One evening, you join the scribe and his son on the rooftop. The stars come out, blinking into existence like embers in dark cloth. No city lights, no noise, just the sky and the hum of memory. The boy asks why the stars move. They don't, his father says. We do. The boy furrows his brow. How? And the scribe, wise as ever, shrugs. We're spinning. But don't tell your grandmother. She thinks that's a sin. You laugh, but quietly. The wind carries your breath into the night. By now, your journal is thick with sketches, quotes, and questionable diagrams. You've written about Abu Bakr's ocean voyage. You've jotted notes from griots, scribes, students, even a tailor's ghost story about a star that fell to earth and turned into gold. You still don't believe that one, but hey, never say never. In the margins, you've made your own theories. No one will read them, but fact, you will. Someday you spend your final day copying the spherical diagram from that fragile manuscript. The scribe insists you use his best ink. It should outlive you, he says. You thank him. He nods solemnly. But be warned, ink forgets faster than memory. That night you climb the mosque stairs. The mud is warm under your bare feet. Call to prayer echoes like a song whispered into a canyon. You sit at the top, your back to the Qibla, your face to the sky. No textbooks, no debates. Just a slow-turning earth under a faster-turning sky. And in that moment, you realize something obvious and enormous. It wasn't about whether the earth was round. It was about who dared to imagine that it might be. You've followed the echoes of thinkers who argued not for prestige, but for understanding. Who trusted geometry more than gossip. Who looked at the horizon and didn't just wonder what was on it, but what was under it. And when they put their ink to parchment, they weren't just preserving knowledge. They were saying, we were here, we asked questions, we mattered. The dust begins to rise again as dawn approaches. A soft wind, the smell of old paper on your hands, and the memory of voices long gone but never truly silent. You're back on the road, though, at this hour. It's not really a road, more like a ripple of shadows stretching across the Sahel. Your camel sighs beneath you, like even it knows this is the end of the journey. Somewhere behind you, Timbuktu and Still Breathe, their libraries pulsing with quiet brilliance. Ahead, the world you left behind. Loud, fast, impatient, and mostly convinced that wisdom is just a Google search away. But here, the dust is thick with memory. As you ride through it, the echoes of the past cling to your sleeves. You pass a group of children, chasing each other with sticks and laughter. One of them carries a slate. You can tee. Help but think about the millions of slates just like it that once carried verses, star charts, and arguments over whether the earth was shaped like a melon or a coin. One scholar once swore it was like a melon with a bite taken out of it. Another said it was shaped like a gourd because the universe must have a neck. Another preferred the comparison to an ostrich, egg-fragile, mysterious, and definitely not flat. They didn't all agree. That's kind of the point. You remember the minty debates? The cosmological calabashes? And that one guy who compared Earth's gravity to the weight of a gold bar dropped on his foot? Still the most relatable physics lesson of your life. Historians still argue whether these West African thinkers were just interpreters of Greek and Islamic science, or original theorists in their own right. But the manuscripts say enough. These weren't mere copy-pasters. They were commentators, revisers, challengers. They carved their thoughts into goat parchment and left room for correction. Literally. Some manuscripts have full paragraphs crossed out with a note. This was wrong. See Folio 17b. That kind of humility doesn't show up in many history books, but it should. The wind picks up, tugging gently at the edge of your robe. You pull it tighter. The horizon begins to blur into copper light, and for a moment, the sand itself looks like liquid an ocean of time washing over forgotten maps. You stop beside a well, its stone rim worn smooth by 1,000 hands. You lean over, not to drink, but to listen. Silence. Then, a plunk of water far below. That's what this whole trip feels like. A drop into something deep, dark, and echoing with questions. You sit, pull out your journal, and flip through the pages. Your notes are messy ink blots, smeared margins, arrows pointing nowhere. Up. But between the diagrams and the jokes, a pattern emerges. They thought. They doubted. They explored. And not just the physical world. Explored ideas. Which, frankly, might be harder to navigate than any desert. You remember the scribe's words, ink forgets faster than memory, but still you wrote it down. You won't forget. The sun breaks over the horizon like a slow exhale. A rooster crows somewhere far off. Your camel grumbles, unimpressed. You grin. In a few days, you'll be home. People will ask what you learned. You'll mumble something about pre-modern cosmology and library dust, and hope they didn't change the subject too fast. But late at night, when the house is quiet, you'll pull out those notes. Trace your fingers over the maps, and remember a world where knowledge wasn't measured by clicks, but by candlelight and commitment. You'll think about the griots, the scribes, the children with slates, the men who argued over spheres like it meant something, because it did, it still does. And maybe, just maybe, you will ask your own version of their question. What shape does truth take in my hands? You stand, stretch, and begin to walk. Your feet sink slightly into the sand, each step erasing the last. But it doesn't matter. The journey isn't written in the trail you leave. It's in the questions you carry. So now, the desert fades. The stars begin to tuck themselves beneath the horizon, and the last whispers of candlelit debates fall quiet in your mind. Let yourself slow. Let your thoughts loosen like old knots unraveling. That long journey through libraries and sandstorms is behind you now. And you've earned this softness, this peace that wraps around you like a warm woven cloth. You don't need to hold every name or date. Let the details blur gently. What matters has already settled inside you, the image of ink drying on old parchment, the feel of cool stone under your palms in the quiet scriptorium, the sound of someone daring to say, "What if we're spinning?" In a world so often frantic for certainty, it's comforting to remember that some of the most brilliant minds once sat under a tamarind tree and just ... wondered. You're part of that same long line now, a fellow wanderer in thought, companion of questions. So breathe, let your mind rest. Let the stars recede. Let the sand settle. Tomorrow will come, full of its own noise and rhythm. But tonight belongs to silence, to softness, to that curved horizon just beyond your dreams. Sleep well, stargazer.